Hey, welcome everybody. It's another episode of Cue It Up with the Q Brothers. You asked for it, and here we are. As always, I'm John Quattrucci.
And I'm Ralph Quattrucci.
How you doing tonight, Ralph?
Oh, living the dream. What can I say?
Living the dream. Well, I recently saw Ralph. Ralph came up for Thanksgiving, brought the entire family. We hooked up for a little bowling soiree, and I think, Ralph,
did.
you got a picture. We'll put it on in post of the three brothers, and I posted it on Facebook, and everyone was asking who won, who was the better bowler, and I said, well, Steve kind of kicked everyone's ass, but you have a 180 average from what I read, so you were very close. And if you ever seen Jerry Lewis bowling, that's pretty much what it was like. It was pretty ugly.
Who said the joke about the Make-A-Wish Foundation? I'm still trying to figure that joke out. Someone was bowling. I don't know. Is that
Dylan? Dylan did. Dylan brought that up. Yeah, but it was fun. It was great to see you. Everyone, you had a nice Thanksgiving with the fam. I know that.
It was good.
We all
The
did,
driving was tough. My one son came from North Carolina to my house to Massachusetts. The other son came from Wisconsin to my house to Massachusetts. It took us 12 hours to get from Massachusetts to my house, and then Dylan had another 15 to Wisconsin. Max had another 7. So, take away all the driving, it was fantastic, but it's hard to forget that.
That's some hardcore. And bowling.
It's tough.
And bowling.
Well, that was hard on you, I guess. You pulled a groin muscle and your right arm.
Two groin muscles. Right arm I couldn't lift for a week. So, yeah, it was pretty ugly. So, listen, today, Ralph and I had a discussion. We were supposed to have somebody on. Actually, my brother Steve was going to come on. But
all of John's guests bail. John's guests always bail.
Well, he felt like movies are not his wheelhouse. He said if you want to talk about bowling,
please,
he'd be happy to do that. I think
but you forgot to mention that he did win. He did beat everybody. And he had open heart surgery and all.
Well, yeah, he recently had open heart surgery and hadn't bowled in 3 years. And I think he averaged.
Yeah,
he averaged like 170, 175.
Yeah, he did great. He did, but that's what happens that first time you come back after a long illness and then long. That's what happens. I was bowling too close to when I bowled the last time, which explains my.
Yeah, well, it was great to see everybody. But so Steve let me know yesterday he wasn't coming on. So I said to Ralph, why don't we talk about this amazing Beatles documentary that's currently playing on Disney Plus, directed by Peter Jackson. Neither one of us had seen any of the episodes yet. So he agreed. So we each watched the first episode. Then he called me and said, look, Sean, who was on last week, and by the way, as a result, we've got like over 240 hits. The only question, Ralph, I want to ask, and maybe you can answer this, we get a lot of hits, but we don't get a lot of subscriptions.
Yeah, that I do not understand.
So what's the correlation? What do we need to do? Is it begging? Do we need to beg more?
I think we need to beg.
All right,
we're now at 40-something, I think, subscribers.
Subscriptions. Yeah, I think it's like 42.
We want to get to 100, just at least for now, and then we'll go beyond that.
And listen, the reason why we want 100, it affects YouTube's algorithm, and it gives us a unique URL. So it actually is a big deal. So it's not just we want more people watching us, which we do. So do us a favor. If you like what you're hearing and you've watched some of the shows, please subscribe, like it, and hit the notification button.
Frankly, even if you don't like what you're hearing, still subscribe. Hit
Fair
the like
enough.
button. Fair enough.
Help us out.
Help us
a
out.
Little mercy.
Chances are you don't like it. We'll probably get more hits that way.
So Ralph mentioned that Sean, who was on last week, is a big Beatles fan, which I knew.
Let's
I
bring
read
him on.
something. Well, let's bring him in. Here's Sean. He's like Ringo Starr of this Cue It Up show.
He's a bit of a Beatle maniac for sure.
I know he is. Sean, welcome back. Thanks for coming on again.
It's such short notice.
Can you hear us, Sean?
Thanks for having me.
He's doing the theme music. I totally dig it. So, Sean, both of now I understand because I saw your post on Facebook. You actually watched the entire documentary, right?
Yes, I have. Once.
The 3 episodes. Okay. Ralph and I have...
I watched some of it more than once.
Okay, so Ralph and I have only watched the first episode. So we want to talk about it. It's okay. There are no spoilers because we all understand what the premise is of the documentary. But for people who don't know, this was a documentary made in I think it came out in 70.
Well, the original documentary.
The original documentary. Right. And it was right before their final concert, which was on top of the roof of Apple Records. Apparently, when they shot this documentary originally, there was about 60 hours of footage Peter Jackson was able to go through all the footage and pick out. He was going to do a theatrical release, and then it turned into a 3-part docuseries. But each episode is 2.5 hours long, and it's pretty incredible. And from a technical standpoint, what they've done to the video, like it starts off with scenes from the cavern where they originally sang. The footage looks unbelievable. I mean, it looks like it was taken today, just in black and white. The whole documentary is like that. In fact, Ralph, you brought something up that I wasn't sure they were doing, but they are doing it. They have a lot of audio, not all video. So they, Well, why don't you, Ralph, say, because you mentioned it to me earlier.
Well, I mean, they put a thing at the front, a little lower third or caption that says, where we can't find, we do a lot of audio work here. If we can't find the sync audio, we're going to throw pictures up under that, so we'll have nice pictures while you're here. But the other thing they're doing, and it's an amazing feat, I don't know how they're doing this. I mean, I know it just took years and years and years. They're piecing together conversations, which you normally do in documentaries and most movies and stuff. You piece together stuff, and they're placing them kind of in their mouths, not in their mouths. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, to create these conversations. Now, there are bits and pieces that come through that are actual sync. And specifically, there's Paul's playing on the piano, and you see the music sunk up. The guitars are playing. The editorial feat that went on in this thing is just amazing. And the way they're piecing together stories to keep the thing moving is amazing. Now, I'm going to say I am not a Beatlemaniac, and I'm not a musician. So I was drifting a little bit. Because I only saw the first episode. I can't wait to see the other two because it got really. Towards the end, it got super powerful.
Cliffhanger.
But I didn't know where the concert was going. I didn't know this was what it was leading to. I didn't know that they were actually writing those songs during this session, like Get Back and Long and Winding Road, and these songs that they're creating as they're shooting this thing. It was 2 weeks, right? They had 2 weeks to rehearse, and then they were going to go on, right? Sean can tell.
Well, originally, you think about the immense hubris of the band.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to take one step back. They had just did the 30-song White Album, which was a grueling affair. While they're recording this, the White Album is the #1 album in every Western country that has rock and roll.
Well, let's just say this, too. That was a studio album, right?
Yeah.
So their goal here was to do what they were calling a live album. No overdubbing.
Yeah, but the original, when they originally thought, they were originally going to play at a place called the Roundhouse to Get Back, and they were going to play songs from the White Album.
Oh.
Because the last time they had done any live music at all, but it was in the studio, it was on David Frost, I believe, and they did Hey Jude and Revolution, which they enjoyed. But those songs weren't on the White Album. They were called the singles. The Beatles tried not to release singles from the albums because they felt it was cheating the fans.
And they stopped touring in '66. They stopped playing the live audience.
Yeah, Candlestick Park.
Yeah. So this was a way to get back to that.
There was a studio audience. But so the idea that they had all these songs that no one had heard, and at one point George even brings this up. It's like, why don't we just play some of the older songs?
Right,
We're just going to do a TV show. So they did that, and they had finished, I think, just like 6 weeks earlier, 8 weeks earlier. They had just finished that album, and now after the holidays, they're coming back, and they give themselves an impossible task of writing and recording 14 songs in 17. Originally it was 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
And obviously they did not walk in with a lot of songs. I mean, Across the Universe was already written, but most of those songs were not already written. Most of them were just, some of them weren't even written, weren't even an idea when they walked in there. So in other words, not only did they have to record and prepare to do something they hadn't done, play before a live audience, first time since 1966 for real, they also gave themselves the added pressure of having to think of 14 songs. And do an album at the same time.
Write 14 songs, or write 14 songs?
Yeah, write 14 songs.
Yeah.
So I mean, this was an, no one. Why would anyone put themselves under this pressure? And I think that's why the guys were all kind of sour, other than Paul. This was another Paul idea,
right?
Which is made very clear throughout that Paul is driving the train at this time, and they're not necessarily happy about it. But I can't imagine what's a big band now? Somebody walking in without already a bunch of songs, walking into a studio with essentially nothing,
right?
And saying, "Hey, we're going to write 14 songs in 2 weeks, and then we're going to play them live."
But what does that tell you? I mean, to me, that tells you a lot about their ego, that they felt they could do this, that they had the confidence that they could come up with 14 songs in 2 weeks. And when you think about some of the songs they came up with, it wasn't like bubblegum pop. I mean, these were like really good songs. So to me, that, and maybe that's more Paul and John than the other two, because they had written so many songs. But yeah, you're right. I mean, 2 weeks is nothing.
Well, the other thing you got to think about too is they had been writing songs together, according to the documentaries, 14 and 15. They'd go back after school, and now in this doc, so this is 70 or 69.
69.
What are they, like 20? 24
23,
years old?
25.
Yeah.
I think George was the youngest at 23.
John, I think they were the oldest, was 28.
Yeah, so this is the tail end of Beatlemania too, right? They've come through the United States. You said San Francisco was their last big thing, right?
66.
So they go in the studio.
Well, no. Not last big thing, because Sgt. Pepper came after 66.
I meant live
touring stuff. They didn't, because they had the problem when John compared themselves to Jesus.
Right.
And that whole thing. And that's why they didn't want to deal with it. Like they even said, they showed a clip of it. When we first started out, we kind of answered everything flippant because the questions were like that. Now we're getting asked very serious questions. But they were bigger than ever because of Sgt. Pepper and the White Album. But
also, you got to remember, forget what happened in the United States. In Manila, they were practically killed. They insulted Imelda Marcos by mistake because she had arranged a party for children that the Beatles were supposed to go to in Manila. And they didn't even know they were invited to it. But they generally, after a bad experience they had at a diplomatic party in Washington on their first visit, they never did political parties like that again.
I never heard that story.
And they mentioned Manila in it. They mentioned Philippines. And basically, how the Beatles need police all around them all the time. The Philippine government pulled all protection and then went on the air and said that they had insulted, the first lady of the country. So, I mean, and they only got out of the country by paying a large cash bribe to people at the airport. So they were very, very much afraid for their lives, particularly
I never
in the
heard
Philippines. That. Yeah,
wow.
So, and this is the thing. I really think a casual fan, to me, you don't even need to be a Beatles fan. Have either of you been in a band?
Yeah, I was in a Blues Brothers band.
If you're in
I was.
This is the dynamic you'll find in any band, particularly a band that writes original music.
Yeah.
It's all this compromise. It's all, you want the people to play your songs. You want them to like them, and you kind of want them to do them the way you want them to do them. And so I think this has wider appeal, but if you're a big fan like I am, you're going to catch lots of references.
Well, that's what I think. I'm a casual Beatles fan, right? I'm not a Beatle maniac by any means. Love the Beatles. Don't get me wrong. Got a bunch of their albums. Love that movie Yesterday. A world without the Beatles would be horrible. I understand all that. I'm not a musician either, so I'm watching this thing and I'm just getting caught in the minutia of what you're talking about, which is writing a song. But I did catch on that, wow, they are collaborating. They're doing that Get Back and they're JoJo Jackson, JoJo this, JoJo, how's it going to work? And the way he and John Lennon play off each other and sing different variations of other songs, even when they're doing cover songs. They're doing covers just to kind of practice in between. And the whole time Ringo's just up by the drums, being Ringo, being Russia. They call him Russia. I love that. I love the code names. And George just, towards the end of the first one, spoiler alert, that's where we find out that George walked out because I think Paul McCartney was kind of dissing him about his guitar work or something, right? So that's when it got interesting to me because the other thing you're waiting for is when's Yoko going to show up and start causing trouble, which at this point in the show I watched, he hadn't yet.
Hey, I can't remember where one ended.
George
Yoko isn't singing. Yoko's not singing at the end.
A little bit. She was doing the little.
She did a couple of screeches. Yeah,
a couple of those.
Yeah, they were very kind to Yoko because a lot of this stuff has never been seen with the video.
Well, now let's
the Niagara reels are out there, and
but wasn't there a documentary?
Everyone always jokes.
Wasn't there a doc before this called Get Back that was a little more critical?
It was a special for their concert, and because it was so short in the way it was edited, they made it look like Yoko's the one that broke up the band. What I like about this,
which became the narrative,
the fissures. You see the fissures in the band, and it's got. I'm sure she had something to do with it, but you could see the relationship.
Well, there was one
George
point,
and Paul.
Well, there was one point where they were talking about the design of whatever they were going to build in the building they were going to do.
Right.
And the guy, one of the managers, says, "I'm going to send this over to John." Or actually, Paul McCartney said, "Give it to John. He's good with that stuff." And the guy was over there saying, "I know you and Paul aren't getting along right now, and this is a weird time to be doing this." But I'm watching this going, but they're playing together. They're John seems very relaxed and happy. He's dancing with Yoko. He's doing voices. He's playing the piano, and every once in a while you see Paul get up on the drums. I mean, it just seemed like until the George thing happened, I wasn't sensing any bitterness going on until the George thing. In part one, I'm talking about.
I always saw that. And maybe I'm just reading into it, but I always felt that George was angry pretty much the entire first episode.
Really?
Things are going to change dramatically. And I think maybe it's just because I was in a band, and you could just say these little things like, play it like, ultimately it comes down to play it the way I wanted.
Right.
But it really, he's being kind of dissed, and John's just as bad. Because to me, one of my favorite songs on the album is I, Me, Mine, George's song. And when he first plays that, McCartney is interested. And then John walks in, and he is 100% dismissive of it. He goes, "Have you forgotten, what is this?" He goes, "Have you forgotten what kind of band we are? We're a rock and roll band. We're not a waltz band." And then he starts to say something else. And he goes, "Yeah, I'll play on it. I'll bring a barrel organ," which is sort of like a real corny instrument. And then George says, "Well," and then, "Can we say the F word on this?" George is like, "Well, F you, I'll just put this in my musical."
That was something Disney made a conscious choice because they don't like the kind of swearing on Disney Plus, and they allowed it in this because they wanted to show these guys as real people. And I think we need to back up a little bit about this movie. Look, there were parts of this movie. It's long, and there's
you're
a
only
lot
talking
of
about you're only talking about the first part.
episode, but each episode is long.
Yeah.
Now I know the last episode they're going to show the entire concert, which is great. I'm looking forward to that. But we keep talking about who would like this, who wouldn't. If you're expecting a lot of Beatles songs throughout the 2.5 hours, you get snippets of songs, right? It's really, if you were a fly on the wall while they were doing this, that's really what it's like. I mean, you're hearing real people, because I'm a huge Beatle fan, but my Beatlemania is prior to the White Album. I liked old Beatles. That's like Hard Day's Night, Help. And you understood their personalities from the movies and from interviews. But in this show, you really see the personalities of the people playing out. And you could understand why George was... Look, Paul, they're all great songwriters, but Paul is the musical genius of the group. You can see that. When he started with that Get Back, and he just had a couple of notes, and all of a sudden it morphs into almost what it ended up being, I was like, that's just the most amazing thing to watch that happen.
It just popped into his head.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And it happened more than once.
He did it on the bass. And, he's playing it on the bass, and he's strumming the bass like it's a guitar.
That's right.
And he's like, I'm thinking something. And he starts playing this rhythm, and he starts throwing words out. And George, Ringo's not behind the drums, and George is not playing. They're just sort of sitting there looking at him, And if you watch the evolution of the songs like that, it's really amazing. At one point, Debbie was like, they were doing one song. Goes, well, why are they singing it like this? I'm like, this is the first time they sang it, And it's really, once you know the songs, it's sort of like you're listening for the pieces. And then 40 minutes later or in the next episode, they do it again. And then it's like, oh, here's another one of the piece. Here's that guitar part I've been wanting.
But like I said,
here's the way they do the harmony.
And they're not just doing
and the piece.
They're not just doing their songs. They're doing other covers too in the middle.
They're jamming a little bit.
Well, they're putting up information every time a song comes up, so you know where it came from and who's the artist.
Yeah. Now here's some things. Even considering how bootlegged the Niagara footage has been heavily bootlegged. The video footage less so, but the Niagara audio has been heavily bootlegged. I mean, but literally, if you look at the fanatics, the people who really knew that Niagara footage, there's stuff in there that none of them saw. There's at least one, possibly two songs that have never even been bootlegged that they play, some of their early songs. I forgot which ones they were. It was in my head earlier today. And it was two songs that literally nobody had heard, and they were on those reels, and somehow they managed to escape being bootlegged. But they were playing all these songs from 1957, 1958.
Right.
And some of them were really good. And one after 909, which they play, I think, in part one, and then they play on the rooftop later. They recorded that song in 1963. It almost was officially released. But if you listen to that 1963 version and then listen to what they did to it in 1969, it's like a whole, it just shows you where they had evolved as musicians, because it's really fantastic. But I think the thing you got to, what this thing is doing is really exploding a lot of myths. One thing about the Beatles, and it's true of all of them, probably least true of Ringo, is every Beatle and ex-Beatle has an agenda, and you're never going to get the full truth from any of them. And the worst offender was always John Lennon. He did this interview with Jan Winter at Rolling Stone, Lennon Remembers, in which he absolutely trashes the Beatles, trashes everybody associated with the Beatles, trashes all the songs, and says everything was miserable. Paul and I never really worked together, on 3 songs. And, I mean, he was just really bitter and angry when he did that. But that sort of set the narrative. And also, George, oddly enough, was very upset with, some of this session, too. So they began that this was the winter of their discontent. This was the worst period ever. And then, have either of you seen the movie Let It Be?
No.
Well, for first thing about it, it looks like crap. It's grimy looking. It was blown up from 16, and it just really looked like crap. It didn't have the colors were so muted. It was terrible. It was terrible to look at. I have a bootleg of it. And before we did on Yippee-Ki-Yay, we did Hard Day's Night. I watched it with Debbie, and then I watched it with another friend. They were like, as much as I love the Beatles, it was a bad movie because, it had no narrative at all. It really didn't. It was like scattered scenes, a fight or so, and then they go on the roof, and that was good. But it just had no story.
Was it a documentary? Or was it
it was a documentary. It's what they intended to do. And I can't blame Lindsay Hogg because the Beatles were very control. And this was what Let It Be is I think what the Beatles wanted it to be. It's like, we're through with the Beatles. We're going to make this film looks like the Beatles are over. And we're happy with that. So, and the only person who ever really complained about that was Ringo in the past. He's like, that isn't the way I remembered these sessions. They cut out all the joy, all the laughter, and everything. And part one, you're not seeing the joy and laughter. Part two, part three, you see it.
I disagree with that because when Paul started doing that Get Back, the way that Ringo and George Harrison were looking at him, they realized what this guy was doing was something pretty special.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't really see that. I mean, it seems like it's interesting to watch their process. And like Ralph said earlier, Ringo just kind of goes with the flow. George, who was a good guitarist, didn't like the fact that Paul interrupted him every 5 seconds to talk about what he was doing. And, you can understand that as a performer. He wasn't like a brand new performer. They've been together this whole time, so they know what he's capable of. And so that, I kind of like that. Now, I hope that as the 2 episodes go forward, as you hear more of the music being built, there's going to be more openness about the joy that they're creating something pretty decent. I hope that happens. But you can see the riffs and I mean...
I took away a couple of... It's funny, I came at this because, again, not a huge Beatle maniac.
Yeah.
I am a video editor, right? So I have that.
You are.
So I'll talk about... What I loved was the workmanship, the workman-like attitude they took to this job. They treated it like a job. They come in every morning at 10 with their donuts and their coffee.
Not John. John was always late.
John was always late, but the Ringo would show up and they, good morning, pal, everybody, and it's like a job for them. And then just from the editing standpoint, the stuff that Peter Jackson and his team did to make a cohesive story out of this, it almost took me out of the film because I'm thinking, oh my God, the painstaking detail they have to do to put all this together and to make these conversations happen. And then, like I said, every once in a while you drop in and the music is in sync. You can see that the drums are in sync, the piano's in sync while conversations are going on. So they're picking stuff from all over the place to create these things. And you're meeting their A&R guys. They do that whole scene with the sheet music. Yeah. I don't know if they were talking about their music being on the sheet music.
They sold their catalog. Yeah. They sold their catalog.
Right? Yeah. So you're seeing the business end of this. George loans them the 8-track player. Right? From his own company to the Beatles because EMI wouldn't pay for equipment. I mean, the nuts and bolts, the daily stuff is what I was Now, as a musician, I got to believe you're going crazy when you're hearing Paul go from G to E or whatever he's doing as he's strumming on the thing, left-handed. This is where I go to, he raise it up here. I mean, you just must lose your mind. I'm getting caught up in the editorial side of it and the continuity, right? Because the
phony syncing, you're right. The phony syncing on some of the conversations. Yeah. I think they had most of the music stuff actually recorded, but they'd throw some in. But occasionally finding that moment where they're mouthing almost exactly the same word.
It's amazing. I used to do that
around the same time because they have to be wearing the same clothes.
It's insane, right? And every once in a while it would punch through and you'd get the sync. I used to do little 2-minute Time Life where you had to sync up a music video that they didn't really sing, and it would take forever. This 8 hours or whatever it is, 2 hour, 8 hours of footage, and they had to cull through hours. 100? I think it was 150 hours of video. Who knows how much?
Well, no, it was 60 hours of video, and I think that was 2 cameras. That wasn't. That was 120.
Well, and then they throw in Linda Eastman,
and then 150 hours. The audio was 150.
Okay, so it was 150 total.
So that's what they had to do. Yeah. Now some of the
and the footage is beautiful.
Where did one end? Did one end with just Paul and Ringo there at the end?
No, I think George.
George had already. They showed the picture of Ringo's house with the meeting, and they said it did not go well.
Yeah, okay. But it didn't. It was. I love that moment where Paul's practically crying. He's like, because when you hear the tapes, because I heard a lot of these tapes. If you deep dive into Beatle podcasts, the Beatles sound really cocky when George leaves. That's what I was just going to say.
They didn't bat an eye. It's like, okay, George left.
But then you see him, Paul is really scared. You can tell Paul is really scared. And there's an amazing conversation that I'd never heard at the beginning of number 2, where they actually bugged John and Paul. They put this. They knew where they sat for lunch, and they put a microphone in a potted plant.
In a flower pot.
Oh, and they didn't know it was there?
Pot. Yeah. And they didn't know it was there.
Wow.
And it's an amazingly honest conversation about how they've been treating George like shit. But it's like, you were telling them to do this. It's like we're wounding him and not giving him any Band-Aids.
Well, they even talked about getting Clapton to fill in for him.
Yeah. Yeah, but you could tell that was just being cocky. Because, they were really unnerved.
Well, I'm sure that they thought George would come running back, too. I'm sure that's what they were thinking.
It's like when they get it, I don't know if it's here, it's like well, where is George? He's gone to Liverpool. They're like, Liverpool? You know, he went back to his parents' house. And it's like, they know it's not going to be fixed now.
He was the young one in the band, right? So he was always
he was
like
the kid.
Yeah. So,
you know,
I mean,
when even around the time he died, he goes, yeah, Paul is 2 years older. When I joined the band, Paul was 2 years older than me. Even now, he's 2 years older than me. You know, because it's like, he's always treated him like the little brother.
Yeah.
You know, and he's like, and he was sick of it. And he goes, but still, you know, even when they got together and late in their lives, he was still, they did get along. I mean, George actually died at Paul's house in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
You know, he needed a private place to go when he got out of the hospital for hospice, and he died at Paul gave him his house to die at.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's funny, when he was really sick, he was in Switzerland, and one of Ringo's kids was having a brain operation, and George was hospitalized himself, and he's like, where is this going to be? It's like, it's going to be in Boston. He goes, okay, I'm going to go with you. You know, George was like, I'm going to go with you to Boston. And it's like, no, you're not going. You know, it's really the Beatles, the relationship that brought him in the band is what, you know, because it was always natural. Even the people at Apple said John, Paul, George, and Ringo, because John brought Paul into his band.
Right.
Paul brought George in, and George brought Ringo in. And that's just the way it always was. But, you know, here's the myths about these sessions. One is that they were absolutely miserable.
Right.
You know, this thing, and people were really worried when they saw that initial trailer. It wasn't a trailer. It was a sort of like, hey, this is what I've been doing, Peter Jackson. And there's all this laughter and all. Beatle fans were like really upset about that because they're like, he's going to whitewash this all. He's going to make, you know, he's going to, because a lot of people have their opinions of Beatles and they're very invested in them. And, you know, this is the horrible time. And it's like, he's going to, you know, but in fact, he shows more bad stuff than was in the Let It Be movie, but it makes more sense because there's more context.
Right.
Yeah.
It's also a lot more
And the other
balanced.
thing is, now here's a question I'm going to ask you guys, not being Beatle fanatics. Episode 1 in Twickenham, does John look like he's strung out on heroin?
I would say no, but
I will say he looks a little, I don't know if distracted is the right word, but he seemed to me, like when I think of John Lennon, I think of, he was the most talkative, he was the one with the sarcasm, and there wasn't a lot of that in the first episode. So he seemed a little bit detached compared to like McCartney, who's like balls to the wall, let's get it done. But I don't know if I saw that. I mean, Yoko was at his hip the entire time. I'm sure that annoyed everybody.
Well, see, that's another big thing is people are saying that the sessions were so horrible because, you know, Lennon was totally strung out on heroin. And I'm not seeing it. And when you go to 2 and 3, you're going to see the John Lennon that you're familiar with seeing is going to come roaring back in the later episodes. And so that's another myth, you know, that's really being broken. And also, too, the hostility. I mean, during the White Album, I think they were more hostile to Yoko. You know,
yeah.
And, you know,
I mean, I haven't seen any of
initially-
that yet. I don't know if you see it in the other episodes, but they were not hostile to her. I could see, you know, they're probably a little annoyed that she's there, you know, when they're in their little group and she's right there and then she does all that screeching. But I saw no open hostility from any of them. Because they all brought their wives or girlfriends. I mean...
Now, you see, but that was not until around this time. No one ever got into the studio with the Beatles. You know, occasionally, an occasional guest. But no one got in, and one thing no one ever did, apparently, no one could criticize the songs or critique the songs except them or George Martin. You know, even the engineers weren't allowed to say anything unless it was about like, oh, we should mic that drum closer or something, you know. But so, you know, like apparently one of the first sessions, Yoko commented on something.
Oops.
And commented on something which was like the absolute taboo. And McCartney went nuts. He's like, what the F? He goes, George, what did you just say? He goes, because it doesn't sound like you. What the F are you saying over there, George? It didn't sound like you at all.
Wait, was that in this or in the
No,
Oh,
that was in
Album.
White Album.
Oh,
White
okay. I'm
Album.
going. I missed
Yes,
that one.
but you see, they're not hot. Now,
Yeah,
you know,
no, I see what you're saying.
there was
Yeah.
apparently a lunchtime fight, and they'll refer to it in the next thing. That John and before George quit, John and George got in a fist fight. And apparently the source was someone on the movie crew for this newspaper article they're going to deal with. But they both deny it. And I don't know if it's true. I mean, there's a lot of argument about whether that really happened. Because they do, whether they, but I don't think they did. Because if you listen to the flower pot conversation, they're not talking about, hey, John, maybe, having Yoko here is being too much stress. Because they're talking about how they're treating George. The problem is not Yoko. It's not like, hey, I should bring Yoko around less. The problem is we're treating George like shit, as a musician. We're not giving him the opportunity to do his thing.
Well, every once in a while.
And the funny thing is, he's like Johnson saying the same thing. He's like, well, it opens, and I don't want to give everything away, but it opens with like Paul saying, John, you're the leader of this band. And John saying, oh, I'm not the leader. He goes, yeah, you are the leader of the band. He goes, I don't like being Paul's like, I don't like being the leader of the band. And they're both talking about, how now they're demanding too much of the other guys to play it their way. And John's like, I feel the same way. It's like, I have to play everything the way you play it. And then you'll start arranging my songs. And he's like, sometimes I use George to counter you. You'll be saying, do this. And I'll say, hey, George, what do you think? Hoping that George is going to tell me something different because I don't want to, go against him. But it's a fascinating, it's a fascinating, honest conversation, and it really, and it wasn't about like, hey, I'm sorry I punched George, because he said something about Yoko. Because you just don't see any hostility, and I don't think they're hiding it. I think if it was there, Jackson would show it because he's a filmmaker and he wants drama. So if it was there, he would have shown it.
Now, who executive produced this with him? Was McCartney involved in this too?
All the Beatles and their
they had to
wives.
have been.
Ringo
no way
and-
you could make this without them.
Right. Okay.
But I want to go back to something, Ralph. I want to go back to something you said because I want to bring this back to the movie itself. It is absolutely beautiful what they did to the footage. I mean,
The footage looks great.
Amazing. The colors pop. There's no graininess to it at all.
Yeah.
How long did that? I don't know if you guys saw Peter Jackson's World War I film that he did. That blew my mind away when I saw that footage. But this stuff looked like it was shot, today. It was that good.
Well, he's got a film. He does film scanning. He does film preservation. He does all kinds of stuff. And it shows in this one. And even the stuff he does at the beginning with the 4x3 shots from the, like you're saying, the caverns and all that.
Yeah.
I guess Billy Preston comes in the next part.
Yes.
They start to, I can't wait. I actually can't. When I was first watching, I'm like, oh my God, 2.5 hours. I almost got out of it. And then I'm glad I hung with it because then the drama started happening and I started catching on what was going on. And then I'm hearing that Billy Preston comes and starts playing the piano for Get Back. I think Get Back is a big...
he starts playing everything.
Yeah.
He drops by. He doesn't drop by to come in and
Just
play.
visit, yeah.
Though, ironically, I think it might have been in part one they were saying they need a piano because they were playing all the instruments themselves. If Paul wasn't playing the piano, he wasn't playing the bass.
Right.
And John was nowhere near as good. So somebody would have to pick up. One of the four would pick up the basic instruments.
But they were talking about Ray Charles.
And when Preston comes by...
They were talking about Ray Charles early in the show and talking about Billy Preston, saying how good he was on the keyboard playing with Ray Charles. And then
actually, what they said was he's better than Ray Charles at jazz. If you listen to what they were saying.
That's right.
So
he came in to just visit.
Well, you're gonna love it. Yeah, he just came to visit, and they're like, "Hey, you want to sit down?" And then it's funny because he plays like 2 days, then he has to go off and do what he came to London to do, and then they're like, when he comes back again, they're like, "Hey, do you really want to play on this album? We're just assuming you want to play, but we'd like you to stay." And at one point, John and George both say, "We would like him to be a permanent member of the band."
Wow.
And to which McCartney says, four is hard enough. And then in an ironic moment, after they talk about Billy Preston, George, who had just been in America hanging with Dylan and the band in, Woodstock, what's it, Bearsville or whatever up there, says, yeah, we should get Bob Dylan too. which they kind of laugh off. But then later one day, George is going to be in a band with Bob Dylan. The Traveling Wilburys.
Oh my God! It's
so
amazing. It is amazing.
There's a lot of predictive stuff going on here.
Listen, I would say,
and
Ralph,
there's that one sad moment when I think it's in one where George, it's just Paul and Ringo left, and he looks over and goes, "And then there were two," which is really poignant because right now they're the only two that are left.
But Ralph, to your point, for the casual viewer, look, I think most Beatle fans are going to love this.
Yeah.
I think if you're a non-Beatle fan, you'll like it. There are points, because it is really four guys talking.
It's work. They're at work.
And there are going to be times when you do fade out a little bit. But I will tell you, those times when they start working on these songs and you see the progression, when they throw in nonsense words just as a way to fill space till they come up with the real word, that whole process, it really perks you up. And as the songs get more to the way we know them, you're like, you just can't believe how fast they do this stuff, and how with all the brilliant songs that they've written over the years, they still got more songs in them. To me, that's what I find the most fascinating about this. And like I said at the beginning, you're a fly on the wall. You're just an observer watching a bunch of kids, brilliant musical kids, put on a show.
I know, but when it starts out at the beginning with the historical stuff that they do, it's the energy is just like bang, 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 bang. And then you get in, and like I said, not a musician, not a big Beatles maniac. It takes him a while to get into it. Now that I'm in, I'm like, I want to stay in and see how it turns out. Totally. But you go and, like Sean was just saying, you think about all the work that they did after the Beatles. You talk about the Beatles songs. Paul McCartney's still out there doing it. George Harrison did it. Ringo is Ringo, so he's kind of, but he was plugging away doing his own thing too. All these guys. And now I want to see how this thing progresses right up until the concert on the roof.
Well, here's the thing. The length is a problem, but it's also great because after a while, and I've seen other people commenting on this too, after a while, the longer you're in, the more emotionally you're in it. It is what you're saying. It's a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, after a while, the length becomes positive because you really become immersed in their world.
No, I can see how that.
In their relationships and in their process. The process and the group that some dynamic. Of these songs go through. In the group dynamic.
Well, plus you're seeing
and then you really root for some of the supporting players, which you'll see more of, like Mal Evans, their roadie, who's there always writing down the lyrics and even suggesting lyrics to Paul. I mean, there's a lot of things.
And who was the guy that was banging the silver hammer? Was he the director?
That was Mal Evans.
Oh, that's who that is. Okay.
Yeah, and it's funny because he would later be shot by the police in Los Angeles.
What?
Because he was like drunk and yelling and screaming, and somebody called the police, and he was belligerent, and the police shot him. And the Beatles are not very sentimental people, but when they heard he had died, like that was one of the few times you'll ever hear that all four of them cried. When they heard
they revered Epstein. They revered Epstein.
Yeah.
I mean, they talked about
it. It's amazing.
Their music
Epstein
changed after Epstein died. They admitted that.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was only 32.
And at one point, And at one point, the director, Lindsay Hogg, is talking to Ringo, and it's sort of like, this is going to be your last thing. And Ringo's like, wait a minute, what makes you think this is our last thing? Of course, it is going to be their last thing. He goes, you're just saying that because we're a little grumpy. He goes, but we've been grumpy for 18 months. But 18 months was when Epstein died. Right. Epstein had died 18 months earlier.
Wow.
And I think I think the other thing,
the real Satan.
What was that?
The real Satan's going to come in on episode. They're going to reference him in episode 2, but 3 is when John comes back from the meeting with Alan Klein, who was going to be. That's what really breaks the Beatles up in a sense, because the Beatles were really a democracy. I mean, obviously there's 2 main Beatles and there's 2 supporting Beatles. But the reality of their partnership is, if anyone said no, they wouldn't do something. Right. That's like they weren't going to go abroad because Ringo said no, I'm not going to do it. And it's like Ringo is sort of like, if you look at the creative process, maybe the least important of them. But if he said no, they weren't going to do it. So when Klein comes, Paul says no to Klein. And the other 3 said, okay, we're going with him anyway.
Now, who was Klein? Who was Klein?
Klein is becomes the manager of John, Ringo and George, and because Epstein's died, and they really need a manager. And Paul does the worst possible thing. He recommends Linda's father to be their manager. And they're already chafing under that Paul's the boss. You could tell in this. And they're like, we're really going to let Linda's father be the Beatles manager. And Paul does sign with them. And Klein is a disaster. You'll see later, Glenn Johns, who's a great producer, who's like, essentially, he co-produces the album with George Martin. But Martin really doesn't show up much until the second episode. And he's really letting Glenn do most of it. But Johns, goes to John Lennon when John Lennon's telling the other Beatles about Alan Klein. And because he knew him because he was, like the Rolling Stones lost the masters. They owned them. They were with Decca. And they owned the masters of all their songs and everything. And Klein got him a good deal, but he ended up owning all the Rolling Stones masters. Mm-hmm. So if you see any of the old stuff, it always says ABCO, which is Alan and Betty Klein Company. So he cheats and destroys artists. And the producer, Glenn Johns, is trying to be very, really is kind of butting in and saying, you may not like this guy, think about this guy before you sign. So it's really kind of amazing later to see, because it's really out of place for him to do it, but he felt, close enough to him and really wanted to warn him.
I think that's the other thing I liked about this movie is as I was watching it, you realize that this is like a couple that is, a month away from getting divorced, and you can see it, and you're dreading that it's going to happen. And so it kind of sets that up. And that concert is really their big swan song. So it's another way to watch the breakup of the band. But again, to your point, people who think this is just going to be them fighting for 3 episodes, that's not what it is at all. They're still collaborative. They're still brilliant. They have their little riffs, and like any group does. But I don't think you have to be a Beatle fanatic to really enjoy this movie. I think this series, if you are a Beatle fan, I think you're really going to enjoy it. I think the first one's probably the toughest of the 3 to get to because
it's definitely the most stressful.
You have to get used to it, and there's a lot of talking where I'm sure there's a lot more music in the next 2 because they're getting closer to the date that they have to perform. Yeah. But I can't recommend this higher as someone who's a big Beatle fan. Again, old Beatles I love. I saw these guys in a much different light than I've ever seen them before, and I really appreciate it. And frankly, I know I've said this a few times, but watching them develop these songs off the top of their head just boggles my mind. I've sung, and I've been in bands where I sung, and I've been in plays where someone feeds you the line. That's easy. What these guys are doing, and they've done it for such a long period of time. It's just amazing to see that process. So, Ralph,
what amazes me about it is about the process, and as a long-term fan, is how little fragments that they bring in. Because I always assumed that they at least had, at least a start of the song.
Yeah, like a framework.
But it's sort of like
a
framework for it, and then they help each other with the lyrics or maybe the harmonies. But they are coming in with sometimes literally nothing.
Yeah,
it's sort of like you're actually seeing them invented right in front of you.
Well, you see their thought process. He started playing that riff on his bass, and you recognize the riff, and he just played it for the first time. I think someone even said, "Hey, that's not bad. That's not bad." And then he starts, "Get back." Yeah. It was just incredible. Ralph, anything else you want to say about it? Because we got to get to a little stream quest too.
I think what else? Isn't that enough? We just stream this thing. We don't have to do stream.
Yeah. No, we have to. It'd be a short one.
You have something you want to talk about.
I do. I want to talk about something. I want to make sure.
2 things. From a editorial standpoint, this thing is unbelievable.
Technically brilliant. Technically absolutely brilliant.
Editorially brilliant, the way they're making conversations happen. I like seeing the day-to-day. I like the little things I'm seeing.
That structure is amazing.
A day in the life.
It really builds.
Yeah, but even right down to them ordering beer. Just drinking a beer while Ringo's on the drums and he picks up
lunch.
his beer. All that stuff. And we talked about George Harrison, that song about that they didn't like. he saw a movie that the night before that they were doing a 3/4 waltz or something, which is where he came up with the song, and then Lennon calls him out. It's all those little things I just are fascinated by. And now I know when I get to part 2 and 3, it's going to get way more interesting. Yeah. Because, like you said, we're going to hear more of the music. So I think
I'm daring to watch the concert. How they
just from a technical point of view, it's just a work of art. Yeah. It's art. It's literally art. It's amazing. So.
Yeah, Peter Jackson. I mean, you know what? That guy's one of our best directors, man. He's amazing. Sean, anything before we get to Stream Quest? Anything you want to finish up with? I mean, you were. I'm so glad we brought you on.
Thank you. I'm anxious to see it again.
Yeah.
You know, as I put up a Facebook thing, and I said, the question isn't whether I would watch this series. The question is how many times I would watch it.
I saw that. I read that. Because someone
when I'm writing something, I can't generally listen to music. I usually have a video on. Mm-hmm. So I know that like when Debbie's in bed and I'm here writing something, that's what's going to be playing in the background, and I probably will turn to it quite a bit. Well,
you know,
so
are they coming out with a companion album or a collection for this thing?
Like a remastered one?
Yeah, I mean,
I believe they are. Right. And because remember, some of it, I would love to hear it, because sometimes they're just showing fragments of these songs, and you can tell that they don't show the start, they don't show the finish. It's like, I honestly wish they would have done Get Back as just songs they had written in 1957 and 1958. Just filtered through their, their increased artistry. Because those songs may have been corny, but they have the voices and the instrumentation to pull them off.
Yeah, exactly.
And if the people who bought the album knew that these were another Lennon, because that's what they would always write in the book when they wrote a new song, another Lennon-McCartney original. And at one point they even say that, another Lennon-McCartney original. Yeah. So it'd be great. And if you saw Anthology, they do play together, in the studio. And it's funny because he goes, Paul's like, let's do one of the early ones. There was a song they wrote, a bad song they wrote called Thinking of Linking, based on some commercial that was like their thing. And they start playing it. It's sort of like, this is a song they had probably not played, definitely since Beatle days, but probably not since 1960. But they remembered it. And even before they start playing it, Paul turns to George and says, the short version, as if like, hey, what version of this we're playing? How do they remember all of that stuff?
I have a Beatles anthology Laserdisc collection. It's like 8 Laserdiscs that I should probably whip out and start watching again.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I always get sad on that when I watch it because the first couple episodes are so joyful. And then it's like, things are going so well, and they're just going to break up.
Well, I just rewatched
this at least
Hard
ends
Day's
on
Night,
triumph.
So I love that movie. All right, Ralph, we only got a few minutes left. You were absolutely correct in bringing Sean on. Very knowledgeable.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on.
But we do, in the last 4 minutes this is part of our shtick. We got to do Stream Quest, Ralph. Oh, look at that logo. We pay a lot of money for that logo. Ralph, what are you watching?
You should do an entire podcast.
I just told you, I watched this. I streamed this. That's it. My Stream Quest was the Get Back.
All right, you kind of sounded angry with
because
that response,
before the Stream Quest, I told you.
Listen, I mean, that's not going to get people to subscribe. Ralph being angry. All right, I'm just telling you. Sean, how about you? Other than this, are you watching anything you want to talk about? It's okay.
Well, I
if
tell
you
you
don't.
what. No. I want to say I saw something I was finding amazing today on TCM. I got up a little early. It was called Eskimo. It was from 1933. And it was this movie that they had no actors in it. It was Eskimos speaking their native language. And they had them go through a plot. But it was just fascinating to see that these were like real Native Americans. Eskimos, kind of an insulting term. But like one of the first things you show when you get into the village is this woman with this small child. She whips her breast out and starts breastfeeding the child. And this is 1933.
No wonder.
Well, that's before.
This wasn't a released theatrical film.
That's before the
sort
code.
Of like, but it's also sort of National Geographic where you could take it. If it's a native person, you could show them naked.
Yeah.
And but then my power went off. We had a
damn it
in my neighborhood.
That's
we had
God.
Where
God
they sometimes turn your electric off.
God struck the
so
power
they could work
out.
on
That's
it.
God
and I'm like,
that.
I'm just getting into this movie, and bam, the power goes off.
Well, I thought you were going to pick the thing that I was watching because it's funny. We were talking about the Beatles. I watched on TCM. They have a great documentary about Dean Martin called "The King of Cool." It was
Debbie
so
and I
good.
watched that too.
It was it? It was great because I know a lot about Dean Martin, but I didn't know half the stuff about Dean Martin that documentary came out. One, how talented he was, but the other thing was his drunk thing was just an act, which I didn't know. I mean, I heard that when he was with the Rat Pack, he was drinking apple juice, but I did not know that was a conscious choice he made to create that character that brought him into his single career, movie career too. I also watched Rio Bravo because of the clips that they showed in that movie, and they talked about it was one of his best performances. But he was great, and the only thing I was bummed out about, they did nothing about the celebrity roasts. I would have loved to have seen something about that, because I watched those on YouTube, and they are freaking hilarious. You couldn't do them today, but they're hilarious. But if you get a chance,
the celebrity roasts were often, particularly in later years, I think Ralph would appreciate this, were not what they saw. They were like, they would shoot. Oftentimes the people were not all there at the same time. The people, they would say, and they would like coach like Milton Berle, okay, laugh like it's a small joke.
So like they were never all, so they, towards the end, they weren't there at the same, I never knew that. Yeah,
they were just, but they made it look
all
that
contrived.
way.
Yeah, all contrived stuff.
Yeah,
wow.
But if the stuff was still funny, it was funny. But and that Dean Martin thing, I had read that Scorsese was going to do
a biography,
the book about Dean Martin.
Yeah,
it was a Nick somebody's biography. And the funny thing is, I thought it's going to make a horrible movie because the whole theme of the book was that Dean Martin was unknowable,
right?
That he never confided in anyone, never really gave up who he was,
which they say in this documentary. I mean, they say that.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I don't think he's a good subject for a movie like what they were talking. But that was a great biopic. Yeah. Debbie started watching it. I was in here working, and I just went in to watch it with her.
And they get into the Martin and Lewis stuff quite a bit, and that whole thing, which I knew.
Wasn't
about,
he Matt Helm too? Wasn't he
he was Matt Helm?
Yeah.
And he stopped doing the Matt Helm movies because Sharon Tate got killed. Because they were going to make a sequel to her movie that she was in, which I think was
they showed
Ambushers.
That. Yeah, they showed
and
that.
he couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to do it. In fact, he's never seen that movie because of it. But it was just excellent. And not to mention what a great singing career he had, too. I mean, it was just a great documentary. So if you get a chance, TCM's got some great stuff. I love that channel. And I know I say this all the time, but HBO Max has a hub for TCM, and they actually have more movies than the actual TCM channel. So figure that one out.
I lied. I have been, after our last Yippee-Ki-Yay, the Friday the 13th, meeting Tommy, what's his name?
Yeah.
John.
Tommy
I've watched all.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, which ones did you like? Which ones didn't you like?
They're all terrible, but I have to say, I thought 2 was quite good. And I remember seeing 2. And 4 is probably the best. Then it gets a little bit, 6 is just, I mean, that's
he's supernatural and
that turned him supernatural.
Yeah,
but I just can't get over the lore of that thing and how people and I didn't realize there was a 2009 remake.
Yeah,
I haven't seen that one yet, but I think I'm going to watch that one. It gives a little more insight into his mother and all that. I don't know. It's so kitschy and so unbelievably how long it's lasted. I mean, that thing, the first
one. And those
one,
last ones were really weird, too.
Oh, my God.
I mean, they really go out
They send him to space. He ends up in space. It's so silly. Yeah. But after talking to John and realizing, I realized what he was taught. He mentioned about how I looked at the script and there's a little girl praying and Jason didn't attack the girl. And that scene's in 6 where she's, as I lay myself down to sleep, and Jason's just staring at her like this and walks away. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
And how maybe
I think 4 may be my favorite. They had a great cast. It had Corey.
Wow.
It had what's his name?
Crispin Glover.
Who's the Crispin Glover?
Where's the corkscrew? Ted, where's the corkscrew? It's some great. Yeah. It's so bad. So bad.
All
it's
right,
good.
listen,
Anyway,
but I tell you what, I watched a bunch of them before
we
did the podcast, and They just all strang together. It was sort of like I couldn't tell what was in
Well,
what
that's what you were
movie
saying.
anymore.
You were saying, and actually, one of them, I think, shows all the kills from the first 3 back to back. I think 4 does that, where they just back to back.
All right, guys, we did this last week on Yippee-Ki-Yay. Okay?
Please.
All right.
Well, you want subscribers or not? This is the kind of talk they want.
Listen, it was a great show. All right, that last week was a great show. We've moved on. We're on Cue It Up now.
We need more subscribers.
We're talking Beatles. Okay, we're talking Beatles.
Yeah.
Sean, thank you so much. By the way, Sean, do you have a nice
Thank you for having me.
Did you have
I
a nice
appreciate
Thanksgiving?
it.
Did you have a nice Thanksgiving?
Yes, we did.
Good.
How's your wrist?
I've been wearing a brace because I fell out of my hot tub. Finally,
we don't want to get into yours and Debbie's sexual exploitations, please. All right, I don't want to hear about it. I love that woman. She's up on a pedestal. I don't want to hear the funky stuff you guys are when you break your wrist. Okay. Anyway, thanks again, Ralph. I think this is a good choice that we picked.
Yeah, I'm glad we brought Sean on. Sean.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and
I'll always talk about the Beatles.
I can't wait to watch the next 2 episodes. So you hear it here, folks. We can't recommend this highly enough. I think you'll really enjoy it. And thanks for watching. And hey, by the way, if you do watch it, let us know what you think about it in the comments section. Again, subscribe, hit the notification button, slam that like button. Everyone, have a great week. See you later, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Get back home.
Get back.